Good evening. Good evening and welcome all. We're very happy to have you join us here at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace Studies. You're going to hear from our IPJ Women Peacemakers for 2015. This is the 13th year of the program documenting the stories of peace building by women from around the world. These women, and from the past, many of whom you've met here before, a number of you I see are returnees, are still out there negotiating ceasefires, mediating between conflicted parties, creating safe spaces for the war-afflicted, helping the tortured and the broken to find peace, rebuilding societies torn apart, and believing that humans have a potential for peace. As long as they remain so involved, we know peace is possible. We are so pleased you specifically are here tonight to meet and talk with our women peace builders. Once again, our women peacemakers and their documentarians, those professional writers who come to be with them and listen to them and write their stories, are showing us resilience and trust and hope. We're pleased to have our provost, Andy Allen, here, and the Women Peacemakers Program Advisory Committee, Women Peace Advisory, and the Kroc Leadership Council with us, circle with us. 2015 is the year we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, a watershed point in time for women internationally. 2015 is also the 15th year anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security issues. That was our first United Nations resolution on getting women to the peace tables, calling for greater participation in decision-making, and working to create means to be free of violence. We will actually be celebrating right here in this room on the 28th of October, this 15th anniversary of 1325. So any of you interested in this, please come back on that evening and watch our website. In spite of growing awareness of the importance of women playing a role in solving global challenges to justice and fairness and kindness and inclusivity and sustainable peace, great hurdles remain before us. So we need to keep going on, calling out, keep learning through the brave lives of women, such as you'll meet today, how things can be different. This is the reason the Women Peacemakers program continues to document these lives. We find models and hope and real ways of advancing peace with justice. Based on current trends in representation in decision-making bodies worldwide, however, we will not be equally represented in parliaments and congresses until at least 2065 and not make up half the world's leaders until 2134. So we must all be active citizens. We must all seek out and hear for those who feel the common bond of humanity and the potential for peace. Thank you again for coming. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jen Freeman, our tireless Senior Program Officer for Women's Peace and Security, also now professor here at the school teaching on women and peace, and director of the Women Peacemakers Program. Jen.
Thank you so much, Dee. And I say from the bottom of my heart what a privilege it is to direct the program that you created 13 years ago. It's the mark of both your vision and this program's success that this annual panel has turned into one of the most attended and celebrated peace events in San Diego. Moreover, the Institute for Peace and Justice is known nationally as the Center for Women, Peace and Security on the West Coast, and globally as one of the foremost programs identifying and connecting some of the most accomplished yet locally grounded women peacemakers in the world. Tonight, we are here to celebrate 4 outstanding women human rights defenders and peace builders from South Africa, Namibia, Israel, and Afghanistan. But before I introduce them, I would just like to take a moment to recognize our local team who work with them day in and day out during their 10-week residency. Central to our program, as Dee mentioned, are 4 professional writers who document the peacemakers' life and work for 2 to 3 hours every morning, and double that in transcribing. Over the 10-week residency, these women work together. I'd like to acknowledge Jenna Barnett, who's working with Pauline Dempers, Gabrielle Clifford, who's working with Najla Ayubi, Claire Doran, who's working with Galia Golan, and Maggie Thatch, who's working with Glenda Vitskett, and the IPJ's senior editor and writer who manages the narrative process, Amiko Noma. Managing the residency this fall is the Institute's newest staff member, a former peace writer who has joined us from Australia via Fiji and Sweden, Miss Stephanie Chu, Program Officer for the Women PeaceMakers program. It is with great enthusiasm and gratitude for all she brings to the program that I'd like to welcome her to the stage to moderate the panel this evening. It is now my privilege to introduce our 2015 Women Peacemakers, 4 women leaders who exemplify moral courage and ethical leadership. Wish we had more of that in the world. In your programs, you can read more about these women's impressive accomplishments. Tonight, you will hear more about their personal motivations and the specific roles that they have played in their country's conflicts and peace processes. So I will introduce them by sharing something that's not in their bios, and I hope they'll forgive me for any mistakes. You can read in your program that Ms. Pauline Dempers from Namibia played a central role in her country's independence, choosing to join the Southwest Africa People's Organization, or what many people know as SWAPO, its liberation movement as a fighter. The story of what happened from that fateful decision to her decades of human rights work is evident not only in her bio, but in a more intimate of spaces, the names she chose for her children. Victor, a dream of victory for her nation to be free from apartheid. Survival, a testimony to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. And Anosia, the recognition of innocence she wishes for her children and future generations to grow up in a free and equal country. Judge Najla Ayubi from Afghanistan is aware that she does not immediately resemble the image of Afghan women that the media has pressed into most Western consciousnesses. She credits her family with the freedom she grew up with for self-identity and an unfailing support for her educational and her professional ambitions to become first a lawyer, then a judge, and now a major figure in rebuilding her country. But look closely when she speaks, and you will see something else. The power of the pen she always holds. A metaphor for her that I have chosen to interpret as, the pen of justice is mightier than the sword of oppression. Dr. Galia Golan has been one of the key figures in Israel's peace movement for the last 4 decades. Working with feminists and peace activists from Israel and Palestine, she has been a part of nearly every major peace group in the country's recent history. You would never know it from the long roster of organizations to which she devotes both time and energy, but she is also a successful academic. She was the first woman political scientist in Israel and can speak as authoritatively on Soviet studies in the Cold War as she can on peace or feminist movements in Israel. Thank you, Galia, for exemplifying how you can bridge those worlds of academia and activism for us. And I would now like to invite to the stage Glenda Vitskett from South Africa. In her many roles building peace and restorative justice in South Africa, she has had the opportunity to sit at the feet of giants. Yesterday, While visiting with her in the casa, I was privileged to hear of her personal stories of Madeba, or as the world knows him, Nelson Mandela. Today, she will be eager to tell you, is the birthday of her colleague, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And if you were lucky, like the undergrad and graduate students in our War, Gender, and Peacebuilding class yesterday, you would have gotten to hear about an interruption to the South African peace negotiations by right-wing extremists who chose to drive a tank through the glass windows of the building where they were meeting. The funny part, according to Glenda, was that one of the peace negotiators happened to lose his toupee across the room in the kerfuffle. We are so fortunate to have Glenda and her sister PeaceMakers, each of whom has lived and played a part in her country's history. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker of the evening. Ms. Pauline Dempers.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Good evening. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I hope you feel the same way. I'm a human rights activist. Excuse me? Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. I'm a human rights activist and a peace builder. I do represent civil society on different platforms nationally and internationally. I'm a torture survivor of atrocities that were committed by SWAPO during our liberation struggle. Many of us were accused of being enemy agents, and I was arrested 2 days before survival's second birthday. I was stripped naked, tortured, and spent 3 years in the SWAPO dungeons. I'm a co-founder of Breaking the Wall of Silence movement that was formed to deal with the atrocities that were committed by SWAPO during the liberation struggle in exile. I learned that many of you may not know Namibia, as you may know the rest of the countries. I have also learned that I'm the first woman peacemaker from Namibia, and I hope I will not be the last. Namibia is situated at the west coast of Africa. We have neighboring countries that played a critical role in the liberation history of Namibia. Up north, we find Zambia and Angola that have hosted the liberation movement SWAPO. Down south, we have South Africa that have imposed its apartheid system onto us. And on the east, we have Botswana. That was kind of a gateway and a transit for us as we were leaving for exile. We were colonized by Germany from 1884 until 1914. The League of Nations, after the First World War, ordered South Africa to take care of the Namibia's administration. And by so doing, they have extended the apartheid rule to Namibia from 1915 until 1989. We gained independence in 1990 and are a multi-party democracy with one-party dominance. SWAPO, the liberation movement, has become the ruling party of the day. Who am I? How did I become the woman that I am? I think the influence is from my father that would, in his own way, defy the apartheid system by not carrying a pass that was required by law and also entering shops that were for whites only and will get in trouble with the authority. So that is the environment that I have grown up in, and that is what has influenced me. I joined politics as a student and then later became a SWAPO member and an activist, political activist for SWAPO. and later left the country into exile to reinforce the struggle meaningfully. Little did I know that my liberator would be my perpetrator. And as I mentioned earlier, many of us were tortured and imprisoned by SWAPO. We were repatriated back to Namibia on 4th of July, 1989, the day that we know as torture survivors, the day of homecoming. We have formed Breaking the Wall of Silence to pursue and find a lasting solution to the SWAPO ex-detainee issue, and also to find out the fate and the whereabouts of the people that went missing while in SWAPO's care. Estimated 2,000 people disappeared. We also helped create culture of democracy, tolerance, openness, truthfulness, and respect for human rights and dignity in Namibia. In order to realize our objectives, we do advocacy and lobby, documentation, awareness raising, networking. I would play 2 clips from a documentary just to give you more of the issue of the detainees that I was talking about, for you to have a better understanding of the complexities of the issue that we are dealing with.
You know, I'm carrying this cross in a quest for justice, peace, and genuine reconciliation. We were tortured, incarcerated into dungeons for many years, accused of being spies of South Africa. We were many who went through this thing. Some of us died in the dungeons. Some of us was beaten to death by the perpetrators, the SWAPO security in Lubango, Angola, during the liberation struggle. What has happened in the past, I've got no guarantee that this won't happen in the future.
They jump, they take all my clothes, they tied me, all 5 men start beating me. Just imagine, but I don't know why they beat me. They ask, I must tell them the truth. I tell them the truth, what I know myself, because I know my background myself. So, and they cannot even tell me why they beat me. I was unconscious. Just from there, I didn't know even how I will go back. So I told them, please, you people, what I see, you better take me to the real SWAPO. This is not the SWAPO which I know inside the country. So they say, you small girl, you think that you are clever. So please, we can kill you. SWAPO don't care about one person. I was really confused. We used to hear SWAPO is good inside the country, and these people, they turned against me, and they didn't even catch me with anything. After all, there comes another lady. He's working also the counterintelligence with that same group. She said, my dear, about your life, just talk, lie in order to survive, because here there's many people who lose their life on that issue.
PWS believes that without a confession from SWAPO, there will be no inner peace for the torture survivors and no greater healing for Namibia as a whole. Ayos, guys, Aroma, thank you for listening.
All right, we'd like to introduce now Judge Nasra Ayubi from Afghanistan.
I think I have a louder voice, yeah? I can talk without mic as well, for the people to listen. Good evening. It is a very privilege for me to be here among all of you, and thank you so much for your interest being here with us and listening to us. I would like to bring your attention to myself. I'm sure that you have our bios. I'm Judge Najla Ayubi. I have so many hats. I'm working in different areas, not only on being a judge or being a lawyer, but particularly I'm co-founder of, I'm talking about my work now, particularly co-founder of global executive board member of Women's Regional Network, which we are working in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, where we have so many problems, and later you will hear from me. I'm sure most of the people are confused. Where is Afghanistan located? Although you all hear every day the bad news is from Afghanistan. It's located between South Asia and Central Asia. We have the flag. We have 34 provinces, you can see. The population is 30 million, around 30 million. As of 2013, it was, the female population was 51.7. We have 2 official languages. I'm sure that you will go to the Google, you will hear a lot. I don't want to take most of your time. Literacy rate is generally 31% of the people can read and write, but particularly women, only 20% of women can read and write. We have a representation of women at the parliament, 25% at the lower house, upper house 16%, which is good compared with the United States, isn't it? This is our achievement. And then we have at the provincial level, we have 20%. We have 4 women cabinet ministers, which I'm glad to share with you this good news that you are hearing every day, bad news from Afghanistan. The history, I would like to just bring your attention to the history of Afghanistan. We have been invaded by superpowers all of centuries back, like from Alexander Great. Start from the Alexander Great to Mughals, to Chinggis, to 3 times by British, which we got. Fortunately, we got our independence on 1919 from British Empire. Then the Russian invasion, and we have faced civil war, which is Mujahideen, and then Taliban. You will hear later that maybe you will have lots of questions to me as well, how I was living in Afghanistan, being ruled by Taliban. And then the 2001, the international intervention. Dynamics of the country, which is, I would like to just bring your attention to the dynamics. After the announcement of the withdrawal of international community in 2014, people lost the hope. The attacks increased, the suicide attacks and other type of attacks. War started to be increased in different provinces. As well, one of the example I'm sure that you have heard in the past 1 week, that the Kunduz was several times back and forth exchange between the Taliban, and also the hospital was also attacked, which I have a critical issue to that, and I will talk about it later. We have increased the number of these extremist group, which is start from the ISIS, Taliban, Hizbut Tahrir, which is totally new. Maybe none of you have heard. Islamic parties, in some other people who don't have a space for themselves to fight. That's why I call it proxy war in Afghanistan. And just 2 days back, Putin called that they are going to ride north of Afghanistan because of riding north of Afghanistan because they think that there is sanctions of Taliban and also sanctions of ISIS, which I don't believe that. That's again, I'm thinking this is a very huge competition between the 2 superpowers. And we have internal ethnic tension, which is again Tajik with Pashtun in different ethnicities, which is also, this is also, leading to the increase of violence in Afghanistan. And also another point that I would like to just mention, that it's very important for us that we have seen the proxy war. We don't want the proxy peace. This is the important point that I would like to mention. Now I'm going to why we, I already talked about this, which is good. One more thing that what women can do, what is my work, what is my role? We established a women's regional network, which we are working with women leaders in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. We got together. The men are creating the war, how we can create the peace or how we can bring the peace. This is one of the aim of the group that we established. We brought the voice of the women, particularly in the area of how the insecurity, corruption, and militarization of the aid impacting women's life in these three countries. This is what we have done. And you will see all of these reports on our website. I will later share with you guys. You will see what we are doing. We are connecting women leaders, as I mentioned, building common agendas across the countries, being a pressure point on our government policies, how these three countries can impact from security perspective and also from economic perspective. We are also strengthening democratic values and also ensuring women political participation. Also advancing common goals and bring stability to the region. Our future plan, particularly we are, based on our research, we have seen that the woman was not heard because of the security intention. That's why we are going to establish, now we are at the level of conducting a scoping study. As a result, we are going to establish a tribunal on women human rights at the regional level. Continuation of our community conversation, which we are going to talk with the community people, and also just in Kunduz, I would like to bring your attention. We have human rights defenders that they are at risk in Kunduz province currently because of the exchange of the power between the government and also the Taliban. We just we provided 3 grants for women human rights defenders to evacuate them to the safest place. That's why we are doing. This is one of our jobs. And also WRN, we are doing researches around peace processes, and also we are going to model the WRN, which is Women's Regional Network, to other places, which in other continents we already got their request. And also South Asia Advocacy Tour, which we are going to see what is affecting the woman's life, which type of policies affecting the woman's life in these 3 countries, particularly at the regional level. And also we have been tackling to address these issues at the international level, which last year we were in the Pentagon and also the US Department. Thank you so much. If you have any question later, I will respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Najla was just checking if she was over time. Thank you so much, Najla. And please now welcome to the stage Gali Golan from Israel.
Okay. That's all. Oh, right. There we go.
Yep.
That's my lot. Erev Tov, Shalom. I'm very pleased to see you here. I was a bit nervous when Stephanie said she was going to say something that's not in our bio. I was a little scared. I usually introduce myself as a feminist, a peace activist, and the mother of 4 and the grandmother of a whole bunch of wonderful kids. And you'll see here, if you can read it, I listed several organizations. I must admit, the worse the situation gets, the more organizations I join or try to create. The first on the list is Combatants for Peace, and I'll talk to you more about that because that's the one I've joined up with most recently. And the Israeli-Palestinian Peace NGO Forum, because mainly I believe today that we have to work together with Palestinians. Peace Now, which was one of the founders, was the mass peace organization, peace movement in Israel, but also Bat Shalom, which was a women's peace organization, part of the Jerusalem Link, an Israeli-Palestinian joint venture, women's joint venture for peace. And there are more. There's a whole list of them. As I say, I keep joining them. I think we are talking about a conflict between 2 traumatized peoples. On
our trauma, that of the Jews, came to a close with the creation of the State of Israel by the United Nations decision to partition the British Mandate of Palestine, 1948. But this marked the beginning of the trauma for the Palestinians, because most of them then became refugees, scattered throughout the region, without a state of their own. And for many years, this seemed to be a conflict with no possibility of resolution. It was very much an all or nothing situation where the Palestinians viewed us as a colonial movement and the conflict as if one between colonists and people who'd been chased from their land. We viewed it as a conflict between two national liberation movements struggling over the same piece of land. Ironically, the possibility for change came with the Six-Day War in 1967, when, I say ironically because the tragedy of the war is that we acquired the West Bank from Jordan and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, which contained millions of Palestinians, mainly refugees from the 48 war. And this was, of course, a trauma and a disaster for the Palestinians, but in a way it created an opportunity, because now there was something about which we might bargain without giving up the State of Israel. We might have the possibility of giving up something in return for peace. So that was an opportunity, but the real breakthrough came in 1988 when the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, decided to forego replacement or destruction of Israel, to forego a state in all of mandated Palestine, and to agree to or accept what they called a mini-state, just in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They recognized Israel's right to exist within secure and recognized borders and agreed to what became known as the two-state solution. It took Israel a little bit longer to come to that conclusion, but this is what made the Oslo process possible. That is an interim agreement, not a peace agreement, but an agreement of mutual recognition between the two, and to sit down and try to figure out how to reach a permanent agreement, Israel withdrawing ultimately from the occupied territories. And this decision, the beginning anyway, with the Oslo Accords, was enthusiastically welcomed within the Palestinian community in the occupied territories and within Israel. And this is just one of the demonstrations that we in Peace Now organized in support of the peace process in the 1990s. And there was a great deal of hope and a great deal of enthusiasm at that time. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, obviously. Negotiations failed. There was more violence, wars, terrorist attacks, more violence, and of course, even today, we see violence throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem. And as a matter of fact, in the past 2 weeks, just about every day of the past few weeks, at least one person has been killed, Jew or Palestinian. And it went on today as well. So basically what we've been doing as a result of this collapse of the peace process and this feeling on both sides that there's no partner on the other side, a lack of hope. Much of the work we've been doing in the peace movement has been grassroots activity, where we have been going pretty much out there, whether it's small demonstrations inside Israel, the one in the bottom corner there is inside Tel Aviv, or the two on the other side. We went just a few weeks ago, just before I came here, organized by Combatants for Peace and the Rabbis for Peace, Israeli-Palestinian organizations, and we went out to the West Bank, as we have on many occasions, to support local Palestinians who were fighting an effort by my government to chase them off their land so that a settlement could be built there. And finally, as I said at the very beginning, one of the things that we've been doing in that demonstration and many others is working together with Palestinians. And this is an organization that I've become involved with much more in recent years called Combatants for Peace. Because this is a group of ex-combatant Israelis and Palestinians, Israelis who were combat soldiers or in the army, just like just about all Israelis, and Palestinians who'd been in Israeli prisons, who had been what some call terrorists, freedom fighters, whatever term you want to use, people who were actively engaged in both sides in violence, and decided to give up this idea to point to simply another way. And so we've been working together to end the occupation of Palestine, to bring about a just peace to the land, and to demonstrate that Israelis and Palestinians can work together and live together. We've been very close in the past years, very close to reaching an agreement. And we are absolutely convinced that it can be done, that we can reach a solution to this conflict. And in fact, that's one of the greatest tragedies of this conflict. It's a conflict that can be resolved. We have come close, and we're absolutely convinced that we're going to get there. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Galia. It's extraordinary you can sum up several decades of peace building in 7 minutes. I think it's a skill set in itself. But so now, please welcome everyone, Glenda Wilskett from South Africa.
I hope I will be slightly more successful than Pauline was in getting a good evening response from you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Ah, that's wonderful. My name is Glenda Wilskett, and I had the opportunity yesterday to have a small conversation with the team in IPJ, and told him that I made a terrible mistake sometime when I was addressing a group of people in Holland. And I introduced myself and then said, and as you can see, I am the result of South Africa's colonial past. And there was a deathly silence in the room. My host called me afterwards and says, don't you dare remind us of our colonial past. I'm afraid I exist. Oh, this is the thing that you have to click, is it? All right. Okay, so yeah, greetings from a sunny South Africa. I come from a region that competes with California for its sunshine, its wine, and natural beauty. I think we may just pew at the edge. South Africa is endowed with rich mineral wealth, great beauty, both of people and of the environment. Despite this endowment, South Africa has an awful, fractured past, dominated by colonialism, land dispossession, tribal wars, and awful apartheid. Opposition to segregation and apartheid was at first nonviolent. But as oppression increased, the liberation movements entered into an armed struggle. Countless people joined the struggle for liberation. Many went into exile. Many were tried, convicted, and imprisoned. And of course, you know the most famous prisoner and the most famous terrorist who happened to be on the terrorist list here in the US for a very long time, our president, Nelson Mandela. As a young activist, I became deeply involved in the struggle and joyfully celebrated our victory when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison and subsequently inaugurated as our first democratically elected president. How does a country with such a brutal past deal with the consequences of that awful history? In our case, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established as a process to ensure accountability and redress. I was honored to be appointed by President Nelson Mandela to serve together with 16 others under the leadership of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who, as you heard earlier on, celebrates his 84th birthday today. And what a privilege that was. Happy birthday, Tata. I think you will be watching this live streaming. No, it's far too early in the morning. Perhaps I should just go back to the previous slide to read to you a comment that was made by the then Minister of Justice about what a commission could mean for us. A commission is a necessary exercise to enable South Africans to come to terms with their past on a morally accepted basis and to advance the cause of reconciliation. What a wonderful statement as an introduction to that process of reconciliation, truth recovery, and healing. The TRC had heard, have I got the right? Oh, okay. The TRC had heard more than 22,000 victim testimonies, considered nearly 9,000 amnesty applications. And I have to be very clear, not as in the case of the Latin American Truth Commissions, where all the security establishment was indemnified before the Truth Commission happened. In our case, perpetrators of human rights violations had to apply for amnesty, and if they met the criteria, would then receive amnesty. We held nearly more than 70 public hearings in cities, villages, and small towns across the country. I thought I'd include a little picture of me sitting in the middle there, just to prove to you that I really was there. Could we go to the video? The media stayed with us for a very long time, and this is an excerpt
Welcome
of
to
a
the first
media
special report on the Truth Commission. The Commission's first hearings were held here in the East London Town Hall, and it's been a week of raw emotion.
We just heard on the door the police were banging with their guns and they kicking the door. And we all just jumped out. We didn't know what to do because there was no one else there. It was only the three of us.
We heard the anguish of widows, of mothers, and of victims themselves, telling tales of disappearances, of torture, murder, and of suffering. We listened to their pleas for more information on the circumstances of the crimes and the names of the perpetrators. We will tell their stories tonight. We'll also show you some of their testimony. But tonight we will also introduce you to a man who has murdered dozens of anti-apartheid activists.
They were brutalized, they were savagely assaulted, and they were ultimately killed. What was your role in the assault?
My role was to choke them, to strangle them and choke them.
There is much work still to be done, but the truth recovery and reconciliation process is not a once-off process. Rather, it's a long and arduous journey. I continue to walk this journey to ensure that there's justice and reconciliation in my country and amongst the people that have been traumatized. I work in the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation and the Institute for the Healing of Memories. But before I conclude, may I ask your indulgence to recognize my mothers, my ancestors, my great-grandmother, who was a shepherd. Her name was Bring on the Water, Masadiwa Pula. My grandmother, who birthed my mother. These women taught me how to work for peace and how to love. And my appeal to you tonight, where you are, will you work for peace? Thank you.
Well, Glenda, you most certainly do exist, and we're very glad that you do. Thank you. So, it's time for questions. There will be a microphone being handed around. So the best way to indicate that you have a question that you would like to ask is just raise your hand and wait until someone gets to you and I can point out a queue. I'm sure there are lots of questions. And if we could please keep them short so we can allow for as many people as possible to have a turn. Yes.
I think this is to all of you. I'm curious to know what you all hope to have as a takeaway from being here at the Institute of Peace and Justice for these next 2 months.
And sorry, if you could also start your question with your name and perhaps where you're from. Thanks, Cara.
So Deborah Lindholm, Foundation for Women.
Thank you, Deborah. So, who would like to start?
Because we were exchanging the pen. I'm always playing with the pen. I didn't get the question.
Yeah, but I got two that don't write. Two. So I got, no, not save me.
Can you paraphrase?
Do you want us to answer the questions, or you want to take a whole bunch at the same time?
Should we take a couple? Okay, let's take a couple. We had one more over here.
Good evening, and thank you very much for everyone's presentation. I'd like to know, they say that it takes 7 generations to get over crimes against humanity. And I'd like to know what kind of strategies do you all see to getting over those kind of crimes that have happened in your countries and around your countries. How do you see getting over that? Getting beyond it?
And just down here, Iveta.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Elizabeth Mayer, and I'm from the Colegio de la Frontera Norte in Tijuana.
Just down here in the pink jacket, please, Iveta.
Thank you. I'm Hannah Cohen, and I'm here tonight representing J Street. And I have a general question and then one for Galia. I'm sure that you have discussed the similarities of what your countries have gone through, and I'm wondering if you're going to be preparing anything to show those similarities. And the other thing, Galia, I have a question for you. Of all the struggles that Israel has been going through, and I firmly believe that a two-state solution is the only way to peace. Do you see this happening under the current administration of Bibi Netanyahu?
That's a very easy question, no.
Easy answer.
But we'll talk.
Okay, so we'll just stop at that and we'll come back to more questions. So, Peacemakers, if you can comment, any one of you like to comment on your experiences and what you're getting out of your experiences here at IPJ and your residency here. And the second question from Elizabeth about the 7 generations to get over crimes against humanity and what strategies you're using to get beyond that. And will you be preparing anything to show your similarities between your countries and the communities you've been working with? And we had the answer to the last question already, but feel free to elaborate if you'd like to, Galia. Okay.
Me? No.
Anyone, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll start, because actually, the first 2 questions are, I mean, for me anyway, in terms of an answer, are linked. And that is what we want to take away from these 2 months. There are a lot of things I'd like to take away, but I think one of them is going to be the second question, strategies to get over these past tragedies. And I think one of the things that I've admired and now had a chance to learn more about of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is extraordinary, and you heard about it. And I assume that when the time comes, when we do have a peace agreement, we're going to have to face our past. I think it's going to be extremely difficult. Obviously, there's been a great deal of bloodshed and hardship, and also dehumanization of the other side, on both sides, a good deal of hatred. And it's going to be very difficult to overcome that. But the interesting thing is, and I learned this in the peace activism together with Palestinians, where I've been working side by side with Palestinians who sat in prisons, Israeli prison, for a long time. And they were there maybe because they actually carried out a terrorist attack. Or they may have been there because just as kids they were throwing stones. And it's amazing to me how we can work together, how this is behind us in the sense that the experience that we've had has proven to us one very important thing, and that is how important it is to reach an end to this conflict. I was once called by a journalist from the radio right after a very bad terrorist attack. 22 Israelis were killed, and it was a very bad attack. This was, by the way, during the peace process. And the attack was from the Islamists, not from the PLO. And so the interviewer asked me to give an opinion of the movement, in quotes, of Peace Now. And she said, well, what does this attack make you think? And I said, it makes me more anxious to work and more active than ever, because it demonstrates to me just how important it is to end this conflict. She was not happy with that answer. She later became the leader of the Labour Party, just the recent leader of the Labour Party. She's terrific, she's wonderful, but she didn't like the answer. But the truth is, that's exactly what we've been seeing and working together with Palestinians. And I'm absolutely convinced that the strategy, if we reach a peace agreement, the strategy is going to be just that, of working together, of just meeting each other and seeing the human being in the other side. We saw it for a little while during the Oslo process, a great deal of cooperation and working together. where we began to see the other side as a human being like ourselves, and vice versa. And that's an extraordinary thing, to walk into the room with a whole group of people who have been fighting, with weapons and killing, and see that we can talk to each other and that we have a common goal. So it can be done. Oh, J Street. I have to say a word about J Street. I love J Street. I mean it very sincerely for two reasons. One is that I think you are what we are, and that is we are pro-Israel. In my case, we're Israelis. We believe that we have a right to a state, but we do not agree with the present government. We do not agree with the occupation. We consider it wrong and immoral, and we think it has to change. And that's what J Street is. J Street has a slogan, which I love, that says you can be, being pro-peace is to be pro-Israel. And somebody says, oh, there was a pro-Israeli and a pro-Palestinian, I don't buy that at all. You're pro-peace or you're not pro-peace. And J Street is very important, but the second reason I wanted to mention it is that I also am convinced, and my colleagues as well, that we need outside help. We have not been able to do it on our own, Israelis and Palestinians. We need outside help, and primarily we need it from the United States government. The United States government has a great deal of influence over Israel, can have a great deal of influence. Use it, please.
So I'll try to respond very briefly to the question about the legacies of trauma and the consequences of ongoing trauma. I think that one of the ways of dealing with ensuring that the generations to come are conflict-free is to ensure that we don't buy into amnesia, that we actually always remember what had happened. And the way to do that is to ensure that in the curricula, school curricula, and in the university curriculums, that the issues of the conflict are incorporated into those learning processes, and that the young generation are able to engage with what had happened in the past, not with guilt or not with a sense of victimhood, but a sense of being able to understand what had happened and to be able to start building peace processes to ensure that peace exists. I just briefly want to say that there are many countries who have had ongoing conflict, where there's been conflict and trauma, that have not gone through any, not a truth commission, any truth recovery process. And I think that we need to be able to say that it's important for us to have some truth recovery process where victims are rehumanized, where victims are dignified, and that that there is an official acknowledgement of the harm that has been done to them. Mm-hmm. Those processes are so important to ensure that we can build a peaceful society.
I'll be the last this time.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, cool. What I'm saying, based on your question, what I wanted to take away from here, of course, we are coming here just to contribute to the program in a way that we are sharing our stories, our work, and how, particularly in the community and also the academic environment, where how you can just match how the theories are matching the practices, or whether they are matching or not. Because so many things are very beautifully written, but we don't know whether these are applicable or not. This is one. The second one, from my perspective, I'm sure that all of you have heard of this attack in Kunduz province, which is one of our region, and you have seen that it was right by American forces. And I think I would like this room to, at least to raise your voice. You know, I know that all of our bloods are the same, but still, you know, if somebody is killed, I'm not saying I'm against anybody to be killed, but if somebody is killed somewhere, and the blood is just totally different, and people are raising their voices, but how many people are dying in my country killed? I didn't want to show the very ugly video that I have just last night watched, and I just keep crying, because this is something that we are human. That's why how you guys, how you people can pressurize the government of yours to be accountable for these attacks and for these, I mean, I don't know how, I cannot, I mean, particularly pressurize the government. Another point that I would like to mention, particularly when it comes to the strategies, which strategies may work, I don't think any strategies may work if the people don't have the ownership. If you don't have the ownership of the processes, how you can go and how you can talk. Particularly in my case, in Afghanistan case, as I mentioned earlier, we have so many proxy wars in Afghanistan. I know that most of the people saying that this is your problem. Unfortunately, this is not my problem only. I know that part of it my problem, but most of it others' problem. That's why I think this is one of the issues that always I'm just arguing with the people who are at the policy level. I'm saying just stop. You do the proxy war, but just stop for proxy peace as well. If the Afghans are not there, if the people are not there, if they don't talk with each other, there will be no peace. That's why we need the leadership plus the ownership. Thank you.
I would start by saying that in terms of the first question, I have learned the history of this institution, and that is something that I will take with me and learn from. And I think that's a legacy that is left for all of us, peace-loving people. And what I would say is that the stories that we are sharing are not our stories. These are stories of humanity. Mm-hmm. And we are connecting in one or the other way. So it is up to us to build the bridges of peace so that we can, as human beings, one day be able to live in peace and harmony. We have connected dots by sharing the stories, and it's up to us, and it's up to you also that listen to these stories to continue to connect those dots and learn, share, and speak out. You never know where you will be the next day.
Okay. Any other questions? One over here and over here and up the back. One over here.
Hi, my name is Maitli. I'm a human rights lawyer. Thank you all so much for coming. I have a question for I guess the panelists from Afghanistan and from Africa. Recently, there's been a dialogue in a lot of countries that efforts at accountability are Western or imperial or imposed interventions. And very recently, South Africa failed to arrest Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir despite an outstanding ICC arrest warrant. Similarly, In South Asian countries, I see, having worked a lot in Sri Lanka, a tendency to oppose accountability as something that's being imposed by the West. So I'm wondering, and actually this goes for all of you, if you can speak to strategies to combat that narrative and to vindicate the rights of victims to truth, justice, and redress.
Cara, just over here, blue top.
Hi, good evening. My name is Barbara Sedgwick Billamori. I'm a counselor in private practice here in San Diego. I'm very interested in this topic. If you believe in the adage that the children are our future, and also building on what the woman in front of me said about this takes 7 generations in order to have healing, what kinds of interventions do you have for your young people so that for peace, for security, and to mitigate some of the ongoing hatred, if you will, and conflicts, number one? That's my first question. And secondarily, on the news, and I know the news is, of course, biased, but all we see are men, in these protests waving their hands. And I often say to myself, where are the women? What do the mothers think? So maybe you could address that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
The ordering of questions was especially good because my question goes right along with that last one, which is, in these times of conflicts and as governments are turning over and changing, we see exactly what she said in Egypt and in some of these other places. The women don't seem to be a part of the process. And especially and specifically, mothers, I think, end up, turning inward to their families and putting that as a very high priority. How do you bring mothers to the table as these conflicts are being solved? And what are ways that they can be, their voices can be a part of those processes?
Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
I think the accountability part is a very important part that I see, particularly when it comes to the transitional justice in the countries, and which, if the people are corrupt, particularly the rulers are corrupt, or they are part of they're all perpetrators, if I'm pronouncing, because sorry for my poor English, but perpetrators are also in the power. For instance, in my case, we have conflict mapping. We did a conflict mapping report in Afghanistan, but unfortunately, because of the passing the amnesty law for themselves in the parliament, because majorities are all of these warlords in the parliament, that's why you don't have such a mechanism. You cannot move through that process. But what we did, at least we could document the victims' voices. There was a documentation of the victims' voices, and they're here through the what is called Independent Human Rights Commission. We collect all of this information, but it's still we think that this is not the right moment to release it, or to bring these people into accountability, because we have a system where, thank you for raising this one, that it was imposed by international community to us. It should be, what it's called, it should be coming from the grassroots level, from the people itself. If the people think ethically that they are responsible, then it will definitely take place. But if not, then that's the end of the line. The second thing is, I will come to you both question, particularly when it comes, I'm sure my colleagues will respond to that. People think at least from our region, I'm talking in our region, most of the women think, I'm not saying most of the men think that the women are not part of the war. Why they should be part of the peace? They think that they are not fighting. That's why they are not eligible to be part of the peace. But what we do, we are bringing the unvoiced, the voices that are not heard, the women who were with the voice of the victims, what the insecurity means, what is disturbing them. That's why this is mainly most of the women are, because of being more vulnerable, at least in my region. Most of them are working like me. Although I'm everywhere, I'm just putting my hand up with a pen all the time. But still, that's something that, most of the women are working really underground and helping the process, the peace processes. This is a strategy where you're not more vulnerability, because the vulnerability is very high, the security is not there, the protection is not enough, and the society is not protecting, and the systems are not protecting. That's why one of the issues that we are trying to do, mainly use what it's called backup strategies or back strategies, I don't know, hidden strategies, something to bring the voices onto the table, instead of being there and not having voices. Like for Afghanistan, we have 9 women in the High Peace Council, but we have 61 men in the High Peace Council. Do you think that they will have enough voice? Do they will be accepted, their voices will be accepted? I don't think so. That's why we are working mainly underground, how we can just bring the voices onto the table, at least to have an impact.
Maybe on women, I think we need to be part of the solution. And for example, I have never been part of a women's league when I was in the struggle, because I have realized that those are the spaces where women disappear and they are never seen. So I have been where people are. And it's one way that we can overcome this, to be present at all times and not maybe disappear in the corners that are designed for us. And also take note of or record the effects that wars have on us as women. We don't fight, yes, it is true, but what effect does it have on us? And that's what we need to more often bring to the fore, so that people can understand. And by that, I would like us to be part of the solution. The future generation, I always say back home, it is time that the generation starts asking when is the future. Because the future generation, the spaces are never created for future generation to feel already and to step in the footsteps of the elder generation. And that becomes a problem. You will, if you don't claim your space as the future generation, then you will be the future generation, and you will not know when that future is.
The women are certainly very much a part of the peace movement in our region, and not just in Israel and Palestine. But I think one of the reasons that you tend to see the men in these demonstrations and so forth, although if you actually look, you'll see, you start counting, you'll see maybe quite a number of women. But in situations like ours, where you've had an ongoing conflict, an armed conflict for generations, certainly decades, men have a special position above and beyond the usual special position they have in most countries. And because the central issue in Israel is security. And although women serve, women and men serve at the age of 18, so on, but nonetheless, it's the fighter who has the credibility, the experience in this key issue, security, the expertise, the experience, and also the legitimacy. And so, oddly, the peace movement in Israel, the major mass peace movement, Peace Now, was created by a group, about 300 reserve officers and soldiers from combat units, who wrote an open letter to the government during the negotiations with Egypt, and that's how the movement grew. But there were two things here. One is there was a woman officer amongst that group. They wouldn't let her sign the letter. And the reason was, number two, is the whole idea was to demonstrate to the public and to the government that you had people who fought, whose loyalty was above suspicion. They had the legitimacy to come out and say what the government is doing is wrong, we've got to change it. That's the legitimacy that comes with it. And the interesting thing is, I mentioned also the combatants for peace. It's the same thing on the Palestinian side. The people who have been in prison for participating in the struggle, armed struggle, they have the legitimacy within their community to come out and talk for peace. And that's part of what happens here, is that this is where the men have this voice that is accepted because they are theoretically the experts, the ones who really understand security. And so I think that's what happens very often in a conflict situation like ours. But it doesn't mean that the women aren't there. And the women very often have formed, and we have, and I have been very involved in forming our own groups at the same time, because we felt that while we were active in these other movements, we needed our own voice, and we needed to have our voice heard. Because, of course, as Paulina said, we're affected just as much as the men, maybe in other ways, different ways, but clearly we have a right to have a voice. And the first Intifada was something that brought out a lot of women, where some of us had been active all along, brought out a lot of the feminist women for the first time, because the first Intifada really was a civilian uprising, mainly by women, where the men had been deported or were in jail, and women were throwing stones at the army. And this civilian uprising, I think, spoke to women, and women who, in a sense, as feminists, shared this understanding, anyway, of oppression. Certainly the women are there, and as I said, I think we felt that we wanted women and believed that we needed our own voice to be heard. And I can't say that we've managed to get into the peace process. In many countries, women have gotten into the peace process. We're still working on that. That's 1325, and we'll have a discussion of that later this month. But it isn't that the women aren't there. The women are there. They just have to be heard. And what we have to do is try to get that voice out there. It's not easy, because none of this struggle is easy. And we don't have the same legitimacy, in quotes, that the men have, except sometimes as mothers. And oddly enough, that works a lot better. We had a group called the Four Mothers, and they were mothers of soldiers who were fighting in Lebanon. And they had a tremendous appeal, but it was an appeal as mothers of soldiers. But we want more than that. We feel that we, as women, we have a right, not just as mothers of soldiers, or in my case, grandmother of soldiers. And that's something that we're still struggling with, so that you won't ultimately and forever see only men. But of course, if we can end this conflict before that happens, I'll be very happy too.
Yeah, that actually picks up on some of the questions that have been coming in on Twitter. There was one from Christina that I guess is asking all of the panelists, what can U.S. mothers teach children about peace? What's the appropriate way to speak with kids? What would you want them to know? And then also a question from Nancy. In times of frustration because no changes are seen, how do you get motivated again? If we can take those.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can consider how we speak language of war and destruction. Consider your computer and look at those dots that you have there. You call them bullet points. We call them bullet points. How about peace points? We really have to demilitarize our minds, all of us. And that's the only way we can do it right at home. Begin to listen to the way in which we speak to each other. Listen to the way in which we engage with somebody when we become very angry. See how violent the language is. I have the opportunity to listen to some of the music that our young people are. I can say that because I'm now sort of, older. I speak to my son all the time. I say, this hip-hop stuff really sounds angry and really sounds violent. So I guess it's not about the broader, big political issues. It's just where we are. And that's perhaps what motivated me to ask if you will start the peace movement just where you are. Can we start with those bullet points, please?
I'm not expert to work with children. That's why we have these wonderful ladies that they are very good on responding to that question. But I have another issue, particularly to the motivation part. For me, I grew up in a war. I'm not saying I'm a result of the war, but still I'm experiencing war in 35 years back home. But what motivates me, being a victim of injustice, this is one. The second, as you get, as much as you struggle, as much as people are putting you down, they don't know that they are making you stronger. That motivates me to work and to do the things, particularly work and be active in the society to bring the positive change, not only for myself, for the current generation, but also for the future generation to not face the same that I faced. This is the point for motivation of me. And I still alive and I'm going on. And I think our peace writers knows, every day I'm thinking, okay, I have so much energy, where I can spend it. No, this is the reality. This is the reality. That's why, when you, as much as you're getting this frustration, you have to put it in a positive point. You have to observe it, not negatively. You have to observe it positively. That's why this is positive point, and I think this is motivation for me. Miss Nancy, I think it was. This is for her.
Thank you.
Maybe in my context, what motivates me is that I have the truth on my side. That is my motivation. And the other is that I come across people that care and people that care for peace. That's another motivation. The fact that I'm sitting here, meeting so many people wanting to listen, that in itself is a motivation for me. Because I know there are people out there that care. There was a question on Al-Bashir. The blame came in Africa. Yes, it is true. That is what we are struggling with. that whenever you speak out, then you are an agent of the imperialist. That's what we always encounter. But then, as I said, when you have got the truth, then that should not discourage you. I'm not an academic person. There was a question on the generations that conflict can take. But what I'm saying, looking at our history, coming 100 years of conflict, and yet peace was possible. We got our independence. And I don't think that the issue that I'm dealing with now and the conflicts that we are dealing with today in the world can and should and must take 100 years. Why? Because there are other peace-loving nations in this world that we can learn from. We have seen how conflicts have devastated some nations, and we can learn from that. So this is not a disagreement with the academicians, but it's an agreement to disagree.
So, I have some bad news. It's come to the end of our time here in the theatre, but we will be serving refreshments afterwards. The PeaceMakers will be there, so there'll be time to meet and talk with them. And we'll also be having some other events coming up. Each of the PeaceMakers will be having a conversation. Each of the PeaceMakers will be having a conversation where they'll be able to speak in much more depth about their work. So please go to our website. The details of those events are online. I want to thank all the people who tuned into our live stream and watched our event tonight. You heard from Pauline tonight how having people come to hear what they have to say keeps her motivated, and I'm sure keeps the other PeaceMakers motivated. So I want to thank you, the audience, for coming along and being here tonight, and thank you, Kendall, for all your hard work on the PowerPoint presentations, Dee, for starting this program 13 years ago. Peace Writers for documenting the stories, and Emmy and Jen for guiding this program, continuing to guide this program. And most of all, thank you to our PeaceMakers for being here with us tonight.